Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome back to the Great Movie Ride Podcast. I am your host, Gaston, of course, with my co-host.
Jerryofdom. Yep,
That,
I
that's
almost
that,
missed my cue there.
that's your cue, man. And today we are talking about Inception, a famous Christopher Nolan film from 2010.
Maybe you implanted that idea in my mind
Yeah, I'll do
so
that
that I'd
later
miss my
on.
cue.
I'll do this later on today when I announce an entirely different movie than the one you thought we were doing next. Stay
Wait a
tuned
minute.
for that outcome, folks.
Did I request what?
um, So, to kick this off with our previewing thoughts, how would you like to start?
you know, this movie has always been because I hadn't watched it in a long time, and I watched it when I was younger.
Mm.
Young me, it's like, people sleeping, guns, boom, pow. Um, Nick now watching it is like, oh, this is interesting. It's all just for a business plan in the end.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's such an interesting thing because it's like such a serious matter in the dreams and all that. And it's just a business plan.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Time is business,
Yep.
time is money.
There you go. So for me, I didn't actually see this film until very long time after it was released. I'm pretty sure I saw it for the first time during the pandemic. So like at least 10 years after its release is when I saw it. And I liked it when I saw it. I really did. I thought it was well done. But I did feel that the movie needs repeat viewings to truly appreciate what's going on. So when you suggested that we do Inception,
Yeah.
I was perfectly on board. Was
It's
like,
also like every other Christopher Nolan movie that isn't the Dark Knight trilogy. It's like, you gotta watch it like three more times.
so our light spoilers plot sum up. Dom Cobb is a professional thief who steals information by infiltrating the subconscious of his targets. He is offered a chance to have his criminal history erased as payment for the implantation of another person's idea into a target's subconscious. That's pretty much all I can say without spoilers. So that's the premise of Inception.
Yeah.
And they call that thing of implanting the idea into the subconscious. They call that Inception. That's your roll credits moment. Inception.
Inception.
Yes. So now let's talk about our characters. We have a lot to talk about this time.
It was a stat cast
It's
too.
a big cast. I actually left
Every
off two pretty big names that we'll mention in the heavy review just because they weren't in it enough to talk about fully. But they're huge actors who played those two roles, but we'll talk about that.
Oh, I can think of one of them. Yeah. Okay.
uh, so let's talk about Dom Cobb, who's portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio, a professional thief who specializes in conning secrets from his victims by infiltrating their dreams. DiCaprio was the first actor to be cast in the film. Cobb's role is compared to the haunted widower in a gothic romance. Do you want to start with?
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
I his character's interesting. There's a lot of complexities with him, and they never, you always are on edge around him, even though he's the main character, because you never know what this man's got up his sleeve.
Mhm.
He's such an interesting character that is played around in this film.
Yeah. I will be the first to admit I am not one who quite understands the Leonardo DiCaprio hype train. I don't think he's a bad actor, but I don't. I'm not one of the. "Oh, it's Leonardo DiCaprio. I think I've only seen him in two movies, ever.
What are the two
Cat
movies?
this one and Catch Me If You Can.
Hmm.
Catch Me If You Can was great, but not because of him, because of Tom Hanks. That movie was
Yeah.
phenomenal, and Christopher Walken with a stellar supporting turn in that film. Um, but all that being said, I think DiCaprio does a fine job in this film, and Dom
Yeah.
Cobb is a complex character. I like him, but I feel like there is a more interesting lead for this film, but we'll talk about that later. I think with a little less screen time and the mystery amped up, there some of the twists could have been a lot more impactful.
Really?
That's my thought. I'll get more into that when we talk about the heavy spoilers. So now let's talk about Arthur, who's portrayed by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Cobb's partner who manages and researches the missions. Gordon-Levitt compared Arthur to the producer of Cobb's art, the one saying, "Okay, you have your vision. Now I'm going to figure out how to make all the nuts and bolts work so you can do your thing." The actor did all but one of his stunt scenes and said the preparation was a challenge and it would have to be for it to look real.
The stunts that he
Yes,
does.
so I get to start with Arthur, and Arthur is my favorite character in this film.
Same.
Arthur is fascinating. Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I have not seen him in many things, but dang, he's good. And all the things I've seen him in, he is phenomenal. There's a lot of mystery around Arthur and his motivations, which works well with him because it's very much what you see is what you get because he's not diving into his story. And I really like Arthur. There's a few scenes that we'll talk about in the spoiler section that I really want to highlight, but man, Joseph Gordon-Levitt kills it, and Arthur is incredible.
The same with me. I've seen him in probably a few more movies than you.
I think I've only
And
seen him in 3.
yeah, I can't number them, but I've seen him in a few. And he always does really great in his films. He's always interesting act. He's in a lot of comedies, but every time he has a serious role, he's such an interesting character. Like in The Dark Knight Rises, super good character in this movie. He's so interesting, but you never get to find out those interesting things, and it makes it even more interesting. It's this
Mm-hmm.
mysterious guy that is like one of the main characters, but you never find out about him.
Mm-hmm. I really liked Arthur. I thought he was great. So now let's talk about Ariadne, who was portrayed by Elliot Page, who was Ellen Page at the time. A graduate student of architecture who is recruited to construct the various dreamscapes which are described as mazes. The name Ariadne alludes to a princess of Greek myth, daughter of King Minos, who aided the hero Theseus by giving him a sword and a ball of string to help him navigate the labyrinth, which was the prison of the Minotaur. I say this all out because the maze and all that is a very important part of this film, that labyrinth that she's navigating. Christopher Nolan said that Paige was chosen for being a perfect combination of freshness and savvy and maturity beyond her years. Paige said their character acts as a proxy to the audience. She's just learning about these ideas and, in essence, assists the audience in also learning about these ideas. You're up, man.
She's an interesting character in this when she's realizing how to do things and all that, and just understanding the complexity of what they have to do. And she does it really well because she asks questions. It's not the person that's not just like, oh yeah, I'll go ahead. No, she wants to understand. She's intelligent. She wants the basis of what is going on. Why are these things happening? And all that. And
Mhm.
she's important in the role in this movie more than you might think.
Uh, I uh, I think Ariadne, excuse me, I think Ariadne is an interesting character, but I feel like a little too much importance is placed on her in the flow of the story because for the second half of the film she doesn't get to do much of anything except for one specific moment. But it's like first half she was very strong. Second half she was kind of just there. Um, Nothing wrong with the performance or the character. The character served its purpose well. Just something I noticed.
Hmm.
So now let's talk about Mr. Eames, who's portrayed by Tom Hardy. A sharp-tongued associate of Cobb, he is referred to as a fence, but his specialty is forgery, more accurately, identity theft. Eames uses his ability to impersonate others inside the dream world in order to manipulate certain people. Hardy described his character as an old Graham Greene type diplomat, sort of faded, shabby, and grandeur, the old Shakespeare lovey mixed with somebody from Her Majesty's Special Forces, who wears campy, old money costumes. Eames is a lot of fun. Tom
Yeah.
Hardy is having a great time in this film as Mr. Eames. Um, and his how they work in that identity theft to impersonate people in a dream, I thought that was really cool. I really do like the performance of the character.
Yeah. He's an interesting character, and again, another one of those characters you don't know too much about.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of, and I find that so interesting because they're always like, oh, gotta give some backstory on the character. they they make it more interesting that there is no backstories on these
Mm,
characters. You are just thrown into these characters,
yeah.
and you get what you get. That base level is all you're getting. But it's such an interesting thing because you can see there's so much depth,
Hmm.
but it's just looking down that pit and you can't see it.
Well, it's like we only get to know the full name of four characters in this film. Technically
Yeah.
five if you count Maurice Fisher, but
Mhm.
that's definitely done on purpose to add the mystery. Like
Yeah.
we know Dom Cobb because he's our main character. We see his thoughts a lot. We don't even know Ariadne's last name. We don't know if Eames is his first name, last name, or real name. We don't know what Arthur's real name is. If it is Arthur, what his last name is. Same thing with Yusuf. We and Mr. Saito, we never know his first name. It's very interestingly done to bring up that like old heist thing where it doesn't matter who they really are. You need them for what they are now. I like that a
Exactly.
lot.
And it also adds to the whole mystery of the movie because you're still trying to grasp everything that's being thrown at you. And I think it's interesting because it makes you so much more focused on the plot than the characters' backstories, and you're just already invigorated by the characters in the story.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about Mr. Saito, who's portrayed by Ken Watanabe, a Japanese businessman who employs Cobb for the team's mission. Nolan wrote the role with Watanabe in mind, as he wanted to work with him again after Batman Begins. Inception is Watanabe's first work in a contemporary setting where his primary language is English. Now, this I found interesting. Watanabe tried to emphasize a different characteristic of Saito in every dream level. First chapter in his castle, he picks up on some hidden feelings of the cycle. It's
Mhm.
magical, powerful, and then it's the first dream. And then in the second chapter, in the old hotel, he becomes more sharp, calm, and smart. It's a different process to have him have different aspects of his character brought out in the different levels. And I was like, that's interesting.
Mhm. I his character though he's just that rich guy that comes with it and the one assigning the job. It just makes it interesting because usually the person hiring people for the job doesn't go on the job,
Mm.
but he joined them for the job to make sure that it was done the way he wanted.
Yep.
It
I,
is an interesting plot.
yeah. I like Ken Watanabe a lot. I think he's a great actor. I've seen him in quite a few things: Godzilla, King of the Monsters, Transformers 4 and 5. I think he's great. I really like Ken Watanabe, and
You've seen in Transformers.
he's Drift.
Oh,
I just really like Mr. Saito. I mean, it's interesting that I like him as much as I do. We'll talk more about that in heavy spoilers, but I do like Mr. Saito a lot. Um, so now let's talk about Yusuf, who's portrayed by Dilip Rao. Rao describes Yusuf as an avant-garde pharmacologist who is a resource for people like Cobb who want to do this work unsupervised, unregistered, and unapproved by anyone. The co-producer Jordan Goldberg said the role of the chemist was particularly tough because you don't want him to seem like some kind of drug dealer, and that Rao was cast for being funny, interesting, and obviously smart. This is one of our more minor players in the heist,
hmm
but an important job nonetheless. And I feel like with his, even though he has more limited screen presence, he serves his purpose very well and a solid performance to back that.
yeah.
Mind you, I'm not found myself wanting more Yusuf, but I do think he's pretty well handled.
I think what they did with him was good. They didn't need to do more, like you said. And I think that's all right because you're dealing with a lot of stacked actors in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's like it's hard to handle a lot of actors sometimes in movies, especially where everyone's not established.
Mm,
So it worked that he was there just to do, the chemicals, the chemist
yeah.
things. And he still holds his part in the heist after even giving out the chemistry thingies.
Yeah. So now let's talk about Robert Fisher, who's portrayed by Cillian Murphy, the heir to a business empire and the team's target. So he's the mark. Murphy said Fisher was portrayed as a petulant child who's in need of a lot of attention from his father. He has everything he could ever want materially, but he's lacking emotionally. The actor also researched the sons of Rupert Murdoch, a very famous businessman in the real world, to add to that idea of living in the shadow of someone so immensely powerful. You get to start with Mr. Fisher.
I love this actor. He is so good in every role, and I cannot wait for his role in the new Christopher Nolan movie
Mm.
where he plays the main character. He always is so interesting, and even though like he's in this movie more towards the end, he's still very interesting the whole time. And though the big main part of this, he still is only a supporting character.
Mm-hmm.
I feel. But he does such a good job at conveying emotion and everything. And I just love his role in this movie.
So Robert Fisher is the character who I alluded to when talking about Dom Cobb as who should have been the lead. Could you imagine, picture this movie, but where we know the ins and outs of Robert Fisher, and through the actions of the team, we learn about Dom Cobb.
Oh,
I think we have a lot more intense of a film in that route, because we don't need to understand DiCaprio's character, because the best part about him is the mystery that slowly unfolds. And what if the mystery, instead of watching the slow burn, the mystery hits you like a truck in certain moments? Like when he's talking to Fisher in the bar and he sees his kids. Just throwing that in there when we haven't been following Dom Cobb, I think would have been a very interesting thing. And that's kind of what I would have preferred from this movie. Not to say this movie's bad, that's just
no.
the thought I had. And that's mostly because Cillian Murphy is incredible in this
Yeah.
role. If he had more screen time, he would probably be my favorite character. He is
Yeah.
incredible. Um, this isn't my favorite performance from him. That still goes to A Quiet Place Part 2, where he just absolutely owns the
Oh,
screen.
yeah.
But he was so good in this one. I really, really like him. So now let's talk about Peter Browning, who's played by Tom Berenger, Robert Fisher's godfather and fellow executive at the Fisher's Company. Berenger said Browning acts as a surrogate father to Fisher, who calls the character Uncle Peter, and emphasized that Browning has been with Robert his whole life and has probably spent more quality time with him than his own father. This is another side character who's super important to the plot.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel bad for him because
Yeah.
he gets treated rather poorly for stuff he didn't do. But more on that in the spoiler section. But the performance was solid, nothing special. The character's not too special either. I kind of wish that again, why I think Robert Fisher should have been the lead is that would have built up Peter Browning more for that final bit of spoiler talk
Yeah.
that you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
And if you've seen the movie, you do too. We'll talk about that heavy spoilers. But I feel like that would have made that much more of an emotional turn, as if we had seen that more.
Yeah, there's not a lot to say about him because he's not in it a whole lot, but it's interesting to see how he's used in the film because it's not what you're expecting,
No, that's true.
and I like that you never really know what to expect. And I feel like if it had been done from the other guys, I'm forgetting people's names, um, but if it had been done by the sons, like his nephew's perspective, it would have made it a lot more interesting
hmm
with how they dealt with Mr. Brown.
Yeah. Like, I'm not saying that the Inception we got is a bad movie. I'm just saying I
Yeah.
think there's a more interesting version
Yeah.
available. Not really available, but possible.
Yeah. This movie's still amazing though.
It's a good movie. So now let's talk finally about Mal Cobb, as light spoiler as possible. Portrayed by Marion Cotillard. It's Dom Cobb's wife. She challenges his abilities as an extractor. Nolan described Mal as the essence of a femme fatale, and DiCaprio praised Cotillard's performance, saying that she can be strong and vulnerable and hopeful and heartbreaking all in the same moment, which was perfect for all the contradictions of her character. This is like the walking on eggshells character to talk about because
Yeah.
so many spoilers that are easy with her. So I'll just say the premise of the character is fascinating and well executed. Personally, I am not a huge fan of Cotillard's performance, but that's just personally. but the writing and premise is very, very interesting and well executed,
Yeah, I have about the same thing to say.
including the performance.
I didn't mind her performance. I like this performance more than her Dark Knight Rises performance.
That's not hard. She was pretty
Yeah,
bad in that one. That was the worst part of the movie, in my opinion.
yeah.
um, so now let's move on to the effects and cinematography. And the effects are gorgeous. Um, I really like how they handle the effects because so much of it you can tell is practically done.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not an overabundance of CGI.
Even the explosions and everything.
Hmm.
There's so much practical effects.
Now it's not the best ever effects. It's definitely not the best we've reviewed. That probably still goes to Dune, but it was really good effects. And I
Yeah.
have special shout outs to the impacts when things crash, the explosions, and all the set pieces. Like, the sets are incredibly well designed and brilliant.
Inception's the movie where you'd watch it on a TV and it will just get stupidly loud for no apparent reason, and then all of a sudden get stupidly quiet. And you're like, oh, I gotta turn it up, switches, boom,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, man.
Anything you want
I
to add about the effects there?
I I like watching behind the scenes for this movie
Mm,
for certain things. The cinematography, the effects, it's just so good. The scene where the room is spinning.
yeah, the hallway.
Have you watched the behind the scenes on that one?
I saw it on Instagram like years ago.
It's so cool
Hmm.
because it's like all those movements are real. They
It's
couldn't reshoot
practical
that.
effect.
Like they are like, oh boy.
It's a practical effect. And that's exactly it. Cinematography was awesome. There's many iconic shots and moments, and a special shout out to the hallway fight scene that's spinning, and it's all mostly a tracking shot. I
Yep.
love that. Oh, you know how I feel about tracking shots. Just,
Dragon shot.
oh, amazing.
Hmm.
So the writing and score. The writing is good.
Yeah.
It delivers a lot of exposition with very little drag. The story is solid and gripping, with the layers to it handled very well. However, some of the explanations do not hold up under close scrutiny, but for a film like this, that is completely understandable.
Yeah.
You can read in close and be fine, just don't read in too close, or you might notice some things don't quite work out the way it's presented in the film. But it
Yeah.
definitely doesn't detract. It's not distracting, it's just, as movie reviewers, our job is to look too close.
Yeah.
But it definitely doesn't detract. Like, it's, I don't hold it against it. For a film like this, it's completely
Yeah.
understandable.
Like it's such a complex idea that when things are put into place, sometimes you're like, how does that work? But at the same time, it's like, don't question it because this whole concept's really hard to
Mhm.
get around your head, you know?
It's completely understandable, is what it is. Like, you don't hold it against it. If you do, you're
No.
just cruel.
Yeah.
It's such
Like
a high concept.
I think the writing's pretty good in this movie, and the characters are done well and all that. And the score, I actually like the score in this movie, like a decent amount. It because it's such it doesn't need big musicals or anything. It's very subtle with it until it's needed. Other than the loud sound effects, when it'll just all of a sudden be really quiet and all of a sudden, you're like, okay, man.
I'm of a similar opinion. I think the score is good. It has some very nice aspects to it. But in my opinion, nothing really stands out to me except for the closing score. Like the final 2 minutes where there's no dialogue and just score. That is perfect. And that's why it's one of my complaints, is it's because of how good that ending is. I'm like, they definitely should use score better earlier on to
Yeah.
emphasize things better. But it's still a good score. But
Oh yeah.
the only thing that was like, oh, was that final like 2 minutes. Just, oh,
I
I
think
love movies, man.
the score in Tenet, I think, is like the
I've
best
not seen
Christopher
it.
Nolan score. Dude, that one or Interstellar, you'll, I think you'll like it.
All right. With all of that being said, it is time. Warning, warning, heavy spoilers ahead. Let's go. Cobb and Arthur are extractors. They perform corporate espionage.
Yes.
I feel like something came out wrong in what I
Yeah.
said.
Corporal espionage.
Corporal espionage. They perform corporate espionage using experimental dream sharing technologies to infiltrate their target's subconscious and extract information. Their latest target, Saito, is impressed with Cobb's ability to layer multiple dreams within each other and offers to hire Cobb for the supposedly impossible job of implanting an idea into a person's subconscious, performing Inception on Robert Fisher, the son of Saito's competitor, Maurice Fisher, who is portrayed by Roland Tembo himself, Pete Postlethwaite, in one of his final roles, um, with the idea to be planted to dissolve his father's company. So let's just take a moment and discuss this in more
A
detail.
lot of information right at the beginning, and you're still trying to grasp what's going on.
Yeah. I think the reveal of the multiple dreams was perfect.
Yeah.
I think
I
that was
also
well
think
handled.
the opening scene when he's on the water and you see the old version of him
Hmm.
is interesting for later on in the movie.
Yeah, because it ties into what we see at the
Yeah.
end.
And the whole it all connects.
Hmm. So it all connects. Um, the multiple dream level, I think it's well established what was going on, while at the same time not giving you concrete answers to it.
Yeah.
It walks that line pretty well, perfectly. Of the
It's
okay,
always
I
keeping
get
you
it,
like
but why?
you're always not sure. You're always is it? And that's how the people feel after going through all those dreams and all that. It starts to mess with you. It starts to make you think, is this reality? Is this not and all that?
Which is
And I
what
think
the
it's
big crux of the
so
film is.
yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah. Um, Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about Pete Postlethwaite. He's one of those big names who is not in the movie enough to talk about. And man, the fact that he can still hold so much gravitas as he's dying, not just the character, but the actor, he died just a
Yep.
few months after this. The fact that he can still hold so much gravitas and that scene at the end really tugs at the heartstrings for a character we've barely seen, and that's
Yeah.
just the power of Pete Postlethwaite. He is an incredible actor. Uh, Such a minor part. I just
Yeah.
had to mention how much respect I have for that guy. Like,
Oh
dang.
yeah. Such a and the introduction of Mal in the beginning of the movie. It
Hmm.
was like, this is interesting.
Yep.
Who are you?
Yep. And then they slowly reveal that premise as well. So, what does Saito promise for this job? Well, to clear Cobb's criminal status to be expanded upon later, and allow him to return home to his children. Um, so that is our setup. The setup in place. Cobb accepts the offer and assembles his team. A forger named Eames, a chemist named Yusuf, and a college student named Ariadne. Ariadne is being taught by Cobb's father-in-law, who's portrayed by regular Christopher Nolan collaborator Michael Caine. Uh,
Yeah.
and while, again, he's the other one who's the big name, that's not enough to warrant time in the character section, but it's always a pleasure to see Michael
Oh yeah.
Caine.
Every movie's that he's always good.
Yep. I keep going back to his speech in Dark Knight Rises, where he says, "I will not bury you as I did
That was
your
such an
father."
emotional
I love
scene.
it. And he's so gifted. If one of a movie that's not as popular of his, that I highly recommend, see Secondhand Lines. If you've never seen it, see Secondhand Lines. Trust me on that. I really like Michael Caine.
Mm.
Um, so,
The the scene where they start recruiting and they get to the Tom Hardy character.
Ames, yes.
This scene where they're running through everything, I really like.
Mm,
And I just love how everything moves around, and it's always like, "Wow, why are these all these people after him and all this?" And
mm,
oh, it's something related to his criminal record and all that. You're like,
mm,
oh, and I think the scene when he gets out of the cafe and he runs down, and it's like the tight like alley that he has to
mm,
get through, and you're like, "Oh boy, is he gonna do it?" And then he
mm.
gets through, and all of a sudden, boom, and you're like, "Oh,
Yeah, it's very well handled. the pacing and the shot choice in those action scenes is very well done. So Ariadne is tasked with designing the dream's architecture, the maze itself that will lead the target through, something that Cobb himself cannot do for fear of being sabotaged by a projection of his wife Mal, who is revealed by Arthur to be deceased. Which is an interesting little twist that we couldn't really talk about before.
Yeah.
So as they're preparing for the mission, Ariadne ventures a little too deep into Cobb's mind and finds Mal waiting in a wrecked hotel room for Cobb, with more to be revealed on that a little bit later.
I think an interesting scene before this is when Cobb is introducing the idea of the whole dreamscape to Ariane,
Mm-hmm.
and where they're at the cafe, and he's like, in dreams, you never know how it started. You're always in the middle of it. And Cobb's like, how long have we been talking for? And she's like an hour, right? And she's like, well, where did we come from? She's like, right. And then it clicks.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a dream. And it catches you off guard because you never saw them come back to the warehouse and go to sleep.
Yeah.
You saw them at the school outside, and all of a sudden, boom, they're at a cafe. And you're like, oh, yeah. And then everything just explodes. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, that was a cool scene.
Yes,
But
it
it's
was.
because she figured it out, and it shows the consequences of the person's subconscious figuring out that they're in a dream.
Yes, exactly. Showing that the need for the subterfuge while within. Um, so, they've got their team ready, they've got their plan in place, and then they receive word that Maurice Fisher has died. And the team prepares to get their mark.
Yeah.
So they take a brilliant plan on a plane and manage to sedate Robert. And their plan is to, in order for Inception to take place, they have to place it deep into the subconscious. So they're doing a dream within a dream within a dream is their plan to take care of this. So they start and head into the first layer. Also, important thing to note, time on each layer is slower than the layer above. So an hour in the first layer was 5 minutes in the real world, I think.
So for the heist, like Inception heist, the real world, they were on the really long airplane flight.
Yeah.
They needed that time. Because, I think it was 5 hours in real life is a week in the first level. The second one, I think it was 3 months.
Okay.
And then the third one was 10 years.
Okay. So that's the pacing laid out there.
I'd have to double check that because I'm not exactly sure.
It's pretty close. So their plan is to have one member stay behind on each level to perform a music synchronized kick, a jolt, to awaken the dreamers on all 3 levels simultaneously and bring them back to the real world.
Okay, so it's a 10-hour job is about a week, so that's why they're on the really long flight.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 hours for a week. Second level, it's 6 months. Out there, it's 10 years.
There it is. So the big takeaway from this incident is that the risk, if they do not, if they die in the dream because of their sedation instead of waking up as they would normally do, they get lost in limbo, which is obviously, for you can probably tell, not a fun place to be.
No.
So, the team abducts Robert in a city on that first dream level in New York, but they are attacked by his subconscious projections, revealing that Robert Fisher has been trained to defend against this type of thing, although Robert himself is unaware of this fact. Or, not unaware, but he's unaware that it's his subconscious that's doing the actions, because he's still not sure it's a dream. And they have guns, so it becomes a very interesting action heist.
And they have big guns.
Yes. Saito is wounded, And the limbo is described a bit clearer as a world of infinite subconscious.
Mhm.
So who knows what that means, really, but that's one of the things that you don't look too deep into. Um, Eames impersonates that identity theft, Robert's godfather, Peter Browning, to introduce the idea of an alternate will to dissolve the company instead of having Fisher inherit. Cobb tells Ariadne that he and Mal had entered limbo while experimenting with dream sharing, experiencing 50 years in one night due to the time dilation with reality. So then our next little Mal twist is revealed with Mal refusing to return to reality. So Cobb performed Inception on her to convince her to return.
Mhm.
But because how Inception works is that idea is planted and grows, after waking up, Mal still believes she was dreaming. The only way to
Yeah.
wake up is to die, so attempting to wake up, she commits suicide and frame Cobb to try to force him to do the same. Hence, the wrecked hotel room was her staging the murder to force Cobb to wake up as well so they can be together with their kids. Which is why Cobb had to flee the US and leave his children behind. Now,
It
that
was such
is
a brutal scene because she's like, I've already filed the reports that you've been abusive to me and all that, and all these horrible things. And Cobb's just sitting there like,
what have you done?
what? What in the world?
Mm-hmm. It's just, man, brutal. So, Yusuf drives the team around the first level as they are sedated into the second level, which is a hotel dreamed up by Arthur. Uh, Cobb has managed to. Hold on, I lost my spot in my notes. So, Cobb manages to persuade Robert that Robert has been kidnapped by Browning to stop the dissolution of the company, and that Cobb is a defensive projection, leading the subconscious defending to protect Robert from the infiltration, um, starting to plant the doubts in Mr. Browning. Very interesting concept on how that's playing out. I like it a lot. And they convince Robert that the only way to do this is to go deeper and find the will through this
Mhm.
combination that he dreamed up himself without knowing it. Um, so they convince Robert to help them, and they go to the third level. So now the Mark is part of the team. It's a very well
Oh
orchestrated
yeah.
film, and they infiltrate an alpine fortress, um, which is this is now the level where they can perform Inception on Robert, and they need to get inside a vault with the idea being
Just to take apart to dismantle the kingdom or
yeah,
not the kingdom, the
the
company,
company. Um,
because he's trying to prove that his father didn't want him to follow in his footsteps.
yes. Um, So they get set to do this, but Yusuf performs his kick by driving off a bridge too early, forcing Arthur and Eames to improvise a new set of synchronized kicks to figure this out. The first one being when they hit the water for their kick in the New York level. And rigging an explosive force was the plan in the hotel, but now with no gravity, Arthur has to struggle to figure out how to drop people, give that kick without gravity. And there we have an amazing sequence of the hallway fight with no gravity, spitting hallway, running up the walls and everything. It's beautifully orchestrated. It's mostly a tracking shot. I love that scene.
So good.
Um, and Arthur comes up with a plan of rigging an elevator with explosives to launch into an item to perform a kick. Another
The
thing that doesn't quite work when you look at the logic, but it's fine.
elevator crash, they go
Exactly.
off the ceiling.
Um, so, as Robert is about to enter the vault, Mal appears and kills Robert before he can be subjected to the Inception. And he and the wounded Saito, sorry, are lost into limbo, forcing Cobb and Ariadne to rescue them in time for Robert's Inception and Eames' kick that he's setting up in the Alpine base with explosives. So Cobb and Ariadne arrive in the limbo world that he and Mal had created in those 50 years.
Mhm.
And Cobb comes to terms with Mal's death. And Ariadne is the one who actually pulls the trigger. This is the only time she felt needed in the second half of the
She
film.
shot Mal.
She shot Mal. Uh, and then they wake Robert up with a kick, which brings Robert back to the third level of the dream. And he discovers the planted idea. Opening the vault, his dying father tells him to create something for himself. This is the moment where Pete Postlethwaite just really sold the whole emotional aspect of the
Yeah.
Fisher story arc. It was, oh, I
I
love
think
that
what's
actor,
so
man.
interesting is that they literally made him perform Inception on himself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably why it worked so well, is he did it to himself. Um, but man, Pete Postlethwaite, wow.
Yeah.
Such a minor part, but dang. And he had hair. Roland Tembo could grow
Yeah.
hair, what do you know?
Who would have thought? Maybe it's a wig.
Could be. Could be. um, so Cobb heads into a deeper limbo to search for Saito. Just another level of this infinite subconscious. And the others ride their kicks back to reality. So everyone wakes up except for Cobb. Cobb finds an aged Saito and reminds him of their agreement to return back to the real world
As young men.
as young men. The dreamers then all awaken on the plane, and Saito makes a phone call. Arriving at LA airport, Cobb passes the immigration checkpoint successfully, and his father-in-law, Michael Caine, accompanies him to his home. Now, one thing that it's hard to mention earlier, but it is important to note for the ending, is every character has who does the dream diving has a totem, something that they only know, that when used will show if they're still in a dream or not based on a certain thing. For Cobb, it's a spinning top. That was in fact Mal's totem that he still carries. In a dream, the top will spin indefinitely. In the real world, it will fall. So as he sees his children and he spins the top to see if he's in the real world or not, he chooses not to see the result and accept this as the reality and heads to join his children as the camera zooms in on the top, which wavers slightly, and we cut to black, not knowing the true answer. It's been 12 years, guys. Christopher Nolan will never give you the true answer.
No, he
Stop
won't.
asking.
Everyone's still asking.
I know, just stop asking. He's never gonna say. And that is Inception.
Inception.
Favorite and least favorite scene. What's your favorite scene?
I think it's hard because there's two that stick in my mind when Ariana Dre
Ariadne.
Ariadne, I'm horrible with names, is figuring out how to use the dream world and she's just playing around with it, creating things, changing everything. It has such a cool looking scenes, you know? And also the hallway scene with the spinning and it's a hard choice between those two. And I think I'll settle with the hallway scene.
Mine is the hallway fight scene. I love it so
Yeah.
much. My least favorite scene is your other favorite scene. Actually,
Really?
it's not the effects or the fact she's playing with it. It's just when they set up that whole thing with her getting mobbed by his subconscious and she not trusting Cobb, and then that just gets yada yada away. While I didn't like hate the sequence, I just feel like since it didn't affect the story at all, it really wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
What was your least favorite scene?
I think my least favorite scene. Eh, It's a hard choice because like I really just think of the good scenes and I ignore the bad scenes. But can you go first? Oh wait, you already did.
I already did,
Um,
my guy.
man, I cannot think of one.
Okay.
I think like I know there's one that probably bothers me or something, but I just cannot think of it.
Alright. That's all right.
Yeah.
Um, so overall rating, I am interested to hear yours. What is
Give
your
it an 85.
85? I thought you would have put it higher. I put it at 92%.
Okay.
I don't have much to complain about this film. I don't like it as much as Dune, but I
Mm.
liked it more than Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
So I've got now, to be fair, Wenwu better than every performance in this film, but that's beside
Yeah.
the point. Wenwu was incredible. That's aside the point though. So now I have performed Inception on Nick's mind. He's not aware of it yet.
Oh
And
boy.
we're going to do a movie that we didn't talk about doing. But when I do it, he's going to be immediately in agreement. Are you all ready for this?
Yes.
Next up on the Green Movie Ride podcast is another Christopher Nolan film, Tenet.
Yep. Okay.
I told you I poured Inception on his mind. It wasn't available to watch when we made the schedule, and now it is. So
We literally were talking about making that on our schedule for the one after, and then we're both like,
we
"Can't wait to
can't
watch
watch it.
it."
Yep.
And then literally yesterday, I'm like, "Oh hey, I'm watching it," and you're like, "Yeah, Tenant's on." I'm like, "What?"
And that's the moment I performed Inception on you, right there. So I planted that in your mind.
You know what I almost did after finishing Inception was go and watch Tenant.
Well, just wait a little bit and do it for the next podcast.
Yeah.
uh, so for the Great Movie Ride podcast, I've been Gaston,
I've been Jerryofdom.
and we will see you in the movies. Bye, everybody.